2016, my friend Lexi and I were trying to get super fit one summer. So we made a pact that we were going to swim around this one rock every day that summer. The swim wasn't that long, it only took like 15 minutes. But the rule was that you had to swim around the backside of the rock. You couldn't just go out and back. You had to go behind it. And the backside of the rock was always a little scary because once you got behind the rock, no one on the beach could see you anymore. So if anything happened to you, you'd be on your own. But we were ridiculously intense about it. Like, we went turbo beast mode. We said that no matter the weather, no matter the size of the waves, the strength of the rip current, we would swim around the rock for the entire month of July every day. And we were super serious about this commitment. Like, one day, Lexi ate a really bad pepperoni calzone and had the worst food poisoning. And she was literally shitting her pants, and I was like, Lexi, you don't have to swim with me today. And she still swam with me that day. But then one day, in the middle of July 16th actually to be exact, because I remember, we were swimming around the rock and something bad happened. So Lexi and I are swimming, and we're like halfway through the swim on the backside of the rock. And while we're swimming, something hits me on the back. It literally felt like someone punched me underwater. And I scream, and Lexi's like, what happened? But I was freaked out and I didn't explain it to her, so I just told her to swim to the rock, get out of the ocean, and get on top of it. Once we were safe on the rock, I told Lexi what had happened, and she was super freaked out, and I actually had a red mark on my back, so she knew I wasn't making any of it up. We stayed on the rock, staring at the water, trying to spot anything moving for like 30 minutes. But after a while, we were like, okay, well, we have to swim back at some point. So we decided to swim in. We literally swam as fast as we could back to the shore. When we got to the shore, there was an old woman on the beach looking at us kind of weirdly. She's like, where's your other friend? And we were confused. We were like, what? She's like, you had a third girl swimming with you, didn't you? And we were like, no, it's just us. And she's like, well, I definitely saw a third girl out there with you guys. But then, a few days later, the local newspaper came out with a story titled Something in the Water. People at another beach a few miles away claimed that they were getting hit by. So people were claiming at this other beach in town that something was hitting them in the water. And they couldn't see what it was, but a few people had described the same sensation. The feeling of a really hard, blunt kind of punch in the water. So Lexi and I start to suspect that whatever's hitting people at that beach also hit me a few days earlier. And even though it was only July 19th, Lexi and I decided that it wasn't safe to swim behind the rock anymore. But I still would obviously go to the beach, and my favorite time to go was early in the mornings. And usually it would just be me at the beach at that time of day, but one morning I came down and the same old lady that thought that there had been a third girl swimming with us that one afternoon was standing there on the shore of the beach. She was just standing there with her feet in the water, but when I walked by, she turned around and she goes, "It must be a beautiful life out there. I bet they're happy." And then she bent down and picked something up from the sand and handed it to me. It was a type of shell that I had seen all the time. And she goes, "Do you know what these are? These are mermaid nails. We must have one living nearby this summer." And then she winks. A few nights later, I was at the beach again at a beach fire. And that's when I made a huge mistake. I bet they're happy. And then she bent down and picked something up from the sand and handed it to me. It was a type of shell that I had seen all the time. And she goes, "Do you know what these are? These are mermaid nails. We must have one living nearby this summer." And then she winks. A few nights later, I was at the beach again at a beach fire. And that's when I made a huge mistake. So a few nights later, we were having a beach fire, and it was really fun. Everyone was drinking. It was getting pretty rowdy. I was a couple of beers deep. And then one of my friends proposes that we play truth or dare. So we're going around, and of course I'm feeling tipsy and therefore bold. So when it's my turn, I choose dare. And this guy, Eddie, who was a few years older than me, dared me to go climb up one of the big rocks, jump off into the ocean, and swim all the way in. But since hearing about this creature in the ocean, I hadn't gone in past my waist. But as I said, I was feeling drunk and brave, so I said fine. So I strip down ass naked and I start walking towards the rock, and everyone's drunkenly cheering, but as I get further away, their cheers become quieter, and soon it's just me and the wind and the sound of the ocean. And I'm starting to get cold because even that something hit me in the back. But I close my eyes and I just jump in, and the water actually feels warmer than the air, and it feels good, and I'm happy I'm in it. And I see kind of the small orange yellow light of the campfire on shore, and I start swimming towards it. But then I hear a small splash behind me, like it sounded like a small fish jumped out of the water. But I can't really see anything because the moon was just a sliver that night and everything around me was pitch black. But I start swimming faster towards shore, and all of a sudden I feel something take my hand, like grab it really aggressively. It feels like another hand holding mine, trying to pull me down. And I freak out and I scream and I pull my hand away and I start swimming faster than I ever have in my whole life. And then I feel the same thing grab my ankle, and I kick and I kick and it's still holding on to it, but finally I kick really hard and I get it to let go, and I'm swimming even faster. And honestly, I kind of blacked out, but once I got to the point where I could touch, I just start sprinting through the water onto the shore. So I sprint back to the fire, and I'm trying to tell my drunk friends what had happened, but they think I'm trying to trick them and scare them and that I made up this They're all like, haha, nice, I can't believe you actually got in the water. So later that night, I'm getting into bed and I'm thinking, did all of that actually happen or did I just imagine it? Like, it just seemed so surreal. So in the summer, I like to wear a lot of anklets because I think they look really cute on like tan, bare feet. So I had a lot of anklets that summer, like rope braided anklets. So the next morning, I'm in bed and I feel something sharp against my ankle. So I pull my foot out from under the covers and I look, and stuck in one of my anklets is a shell. And I look a little closer and it's the same shell that the old lady showed me on the beach, a mermaid's nail. When I was in 6th grade, I went to go visit my little cousins at their house. Their house was right on the edge of these woods, and the woods were really thick, and our parents always told us not to go there. And one time I asked my mom why, and she said because when people do bad things, they sometimes go and hide in the woods. I was staying at my cousin's house for a week on this one trip, and whenever I was bored, I would go look out the window and watch the woods. Usually it was pretty boring, and I would just be staring at trees, but one day it was like 5 p.m. and the sun was setting, so it was getting dark, and I saw something moving in the woods. I told my uncle, and he said it was probably just an animal. And I told him no, it was tall and looked like a skinny lady. And he said I have a creative imagination and it was probably just a deer. But then a few minutes later, I heard my aunt and uncle whispering in the kitchen. My aunt was talking about a woman from the psychiatric hospital in their town who had escaped. Their house was like 15 minutes away from a maximum security psychiatric hospital for criminals with mental illness. And then they saw me listening to them in the doorway and they stopped talking completely. A few days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a noise. So I woke up in the middle of the night from this noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like something was scratching the back door. But when I got downstairs, the noise had stopped. But when I looked at the window facing the woods, there were footprints in the snow. But my aunt and uncle were really strict, and they had this rule that we weren't allowed to go in their room when they were sleeping. So I made sure all the doors were locked, and I decided I would tell them in the morning. The next morning we woke up and it was a really intense blizzard. Such heavy snowfall that we couldn't see the ground. So when I told my aunt and uncle about the footprints, they didn't believe me and told me it was probably a nightmare. The next day I had to leave, and I didn't go back and visit my cousins for a long time. But the next summer, my cousins really wanted me to come for their birthday party. Before visiting them, I looked up whether they had ever found the woman who had escaped from the hospital. And Google said that authorities were still looking for her and it was a high priority case. When I got to their house, I was playing with my cousins. They were about to turn 6 years old, and one of them goes, "Let's go check if she's there." And my cousin runs to the window facing the woods. So I asked my other cousin who she was talking about, and she goes, "Oh, don't worry, that's just her imaginary friend." But I knew that did not sound right. That did not sound right. So I asked my cousin more about her imaginary friend, and she said she lives in the woods. And when I asked her if she ever spoke to her imaginary friend, she said no, just sometimes they wave to each other. And then when I asked if this imaginary friend was real, she shrugged and she said, maybe. So I really wasn't sure what to do because my cousin was always playing imaginary games and making up fake scenarios, and she had had imaginary friends in the past, so it wasn't unlike her. But I kept thinking about the missing insane asylum patient, and it just seemed eerie and coincidental. The next day was my cousin's birthday party. They invited all their friends and they had a pool party. When all the little girls were done swimming, I hung up all their bathing suits on a clothing line that was strung from their house to a tree on the perimeter of the woods. Later in the afternoon, everyone wanted to go swimming again, but when I went to get their bathing suits, one was missing. So one of the girls had to swim in a t-shirt and shorts. But when we were all in the pool, I noticed in the corner of my eye that there was something blue in the woods. So I got out of the pool and I walked a little bit closer, but I was timid because I was super scared of the woods. And as I got closer, I realized it was the girl's bathing suit. At first I thought maybe the wind had blown it, but then I realized there was absolutely no wind that day. And even weirder, the way it was hung up on the tree looked like someone had put it there. It didn't look like it was blown there. It was hung there really neatly. The day after the pool party, my uncle was like, damn, you guys really went to town on the pickles. And we were all like, what? And he's like, I bought that huge jar of pickles from Costco last week and they're all gone. Didn't you guys eat them at the birthday party? And I was like, we didn't have any pickles at the party. I'm really allergic to cucumbers. We didn't have any pickles at the party. I'm really allergic to cucumbers. And then my little cousin was like, my imaginary friend loves pickles. They're her favorite food. And finally, for the first time, it seemed like my uncle was actually freaked out by this imaginary friend. So my aunt and my uncle ended up seriously asking my little cousin a lot about this imaginary friend of hers. And I actually ended up leaving a day early because it just started to get kind of serious and it was time for me to go. The next week I was at the park near my house and I got a text from my mom telling me to come straight home. When I got home, she was there and she was sitting down and she told me she had something serious to tell me, which was that they had found the missing patient from the hospital near my cousin's house. She had been living in the woods right by their house, and she was able to survive so long on her own in the woods because my little cousin would give her food from their house. I was in 8th grade, both my parents had to travel a lot for work, so I was home alone a lot. And we lived in this really rural area in New England. Our house was at the end of this 3-mile-long, winding dirt road, surrounded by thick woods. My parents didn't like me having people over when they weren't there, so the only person who ever came to our house in the afternoons was the UPS guy, and his name was Randy, and he was really nice. We'd always chat for a bit. It was just nice to have someone to talk to after school when my parents weren't around. One day, Randy came by and dropped off some packages, but before he left, he asked me if I was expecting a house guest. I said no. Why? He said he saw a woman about halfway up our road walking, and she asked him if he was headed to our house, and when Randy said he was, she asked him for a ride. He told the lady that it was UPS company policy that he couldn't let anyone in the truck. Randy could tell that I was creeped out, so he said he would drive back down the road to check if she was still there walking. He said he would come back and let me know whether he saw her or not. So while Randy was checking, I started opening the 2 packages he had brought. One package was a sweater I'd ordered. The other package was one I wasn't expecting in one of those big yellow envelopes. It was addressed specifically to me. When I opened it, I was petrified. When Randy came back, I was sitting down, completely freaked out. I just opened an envelope addressed to me that had no return address. In it were hair clippings that matched my hair perfectly, an old pink sock that I had been looking for because normally I'm really anal about matching socks, and for months I couldn't find the match. Until now. Scariest of all was a picture of feet. The photo looked like it had been taken at night with a phone and the flash on. And the reason it freaked me out so much is because I recognized the feet. They were my feet. The blankets around the feet were from my bed. And the nail polish was the exact same shade of blue I had been wearing a month earlier. When Randy got out of his car and saw my face, he asked me what was wrong.